Now to two school threats today that did not have tragic outcomes. Los Angeles schools shut down as a result of a threat they received, leaving nearly 700,000 kids home for the day. Officials said the decision was made after a, quote, credible threat of violence was made at several of the 900 schools in the district.
Based on past circumstances, I could not take the chance.
That was the superintendent. On the other side of the country, New York City officials were fielding threats as well, which they ultimately decided were not credible. So they decided to keep schools open. And New York City Police Commissioner Bill Bratton has some tough criticism of the way things went in L.A.
And to disrupt the daily schedules of 500,000 school children, their parents, daycare, buses, based on an anonymous email without consultation, if in fact consultation did not occur with law enforcement authorities, I think it was a significant overreaction.
So, who got it right? Joining me to talk about it are Juliette Kayyem, former Undersecretary of Homeland Security and WGBH News security analyst. Good to see you, Juliette. Former Watertown Police Chief Ed DeVoe. He's now the Vice President of Business Development at DataViz. Ed, it's good to see you as well. Who got it right, Juliette Kayyem?
Obviously New York.
Why obviously?
For a variety of reasons. At least what we know now, but even what they knew overnight was that this was a threat that came over the internet, easy to do. It was an email, and that processes broke down in Los Angeles. So, everyone says, well, better safe than sorry. It's actually not true. We cannot live in a society in which a random threat is going to disrupt not just those kids, but obviously their families, businesses, and everything else. It appears that the LAPD were not notified, and this was a decision by some small group of people. That's not how systems work.
If you weren't the woman behind the Security Mom podcast, I wouldn't ask this question. You have kids in the Cambridge Public Schools.
I do.
There were threats in those schools a few weeks ago. Were you as okay with them not shutting down the schools and just adding extra security?
Absolutely, and they notified us, and they emailed, and they texted, and they said, "Here's what's going on," and we're all adults, and in the sense of the parents, and we need to take responsibility for the actions of each other as a community. But to close down a school system like this. Look, we can blame LA forever, and people will do that. The most important thing is that the mayor create some sort of analysis or after-action review to figure out what processes
I want to talk about the
down.
future, but I want to stay on this for just 1 second. I was stunned by the ferocity of Bill Bratton's comment. Was that only because they didn't consult allegedly with the LA police, or was that just throwing something at at the West Coast? What was it?
Well, I think it's probably a little bit of both, but I think New York, you can see that they've been through this a lot. It was very well coordinated. Everybody was involved, and they made a decision together. It's obvious in Los Angeles it wasn't done that way.
So you agree with her?
Pretty much. I think the LAPD found out, my understanding is, very late in the morning, and they didn't help make that decision, and that's unfortunate. To have the exact same thing happen in two major cities and have two different decisions made while they're working with the FBI is not good.
In defense of them, and I think I'm where you are, even though I don't have the expertise. I mean, you lived through the Watertown, the marathon aftermath. Obviously, the younger Tsarnaev caught in your town, well, not to mention the older Tsarnaev, what happened to him there. Isn't there an understandable likelihood of overreaction, to use Bratton's term, when you're following on the heels of a San Bernardino or a Paris or a Colorado Springs? And that was my sense of what might have been happening in Los Angeles. Is that not a fair analysis?
Oh, I think you're right on top of it. I think because you had the school committee making decisions based on what happened in 2 weeks, instead of taking the professionals down in Washington in the LAPD and letting them weigh in on it.
Let's get to your point, Juliette Kayyem. It's not just what happened today, but how do we react? On one hand, we read in the newspaper today, I don't know how credible it is, that there have been 161 school shootings since Sandy Hook. That's roughly one a week. On the other hand, we've had this discussion before. Experts say the safest place for a child to be in America is in a school. So who's right, and where do we go from here?
Overall, schools are relatively safe. I mean, we hear about school violence, obviously, on the week of the anniversary of Sandy Hook. We are remembering that moment, but schools are relatively safe overall. And part of it is a lot of them have security. They have protocols. They have their own security apparatus. There's lots of communication to family members. So sending your kid to school actually is a relatively safe action to do. Anyone who has kids at home, my kids have broken bones only at home, right? Keep them, don't, I'm going to send them to school on Saturdays and Sundays now. But, and so I think, but look, these decisions, Ed and I both know because we've made them, are an art, not a science. But there's a process behind the art. In other words, who knows who's right given all the threat streams and whatever. And it looks like in LA that the whole process fell apart. And if that's the case, there is a lot to learn.
But how about going forward? I would argue going forward, planning is more of a science than an art. And while you rejected, I think wisely, when you were quoting the Globe about this ridiculous notion you're going to send your kid to school with a $250 bulletproof backpack, you're nodding your head. I assume you agree. What should we be doing at schools? Do we do active shooter training, which I believe scares the you-know-what out of a little 6 or 7-year-old? What should happen in the schools going forward after what we've lived through lately to make them as safe as possible without traumatizing the younger kids, Ed?
Well, it's a balance, but I think we do have to train and we have to have them prepared for that, even
What
at
does
the
that mean,
elementary
have them
schools.
prepared?
Well, I think the first responders are already prepared. We know
How
what
about
to
the
do with
kids?
active
What do we do
shooter.
with the kids?
Well, I think if you have an active shooter, everybody has to get involved to distract that person to save lives.
Do you have
And
actual active shooter training? Would you recommend that? You're shaking your head yes. For little kids?
Right. I think it has happened. We have to have them prepared for the future.
And you're agreeing, but doesn't that put in their minds a level of
Look,
fear
it's all
that makes it
true.
almost impossible to enjoy and learn in
First
school?
of all, it's always age appropriate. So, I mean, the 5-year-olds or 6-year-olds, you practice evacuation, you practice emergency planning. You don't have to talk about an active shooter. But you tell me the 14-year-old who doesn't know that there is an active shooter case, down the street or in LA or something. These kids know what's going on, and you can pretend that we live in a land of fairy tales. We don't. And the best that we can do is to give our kids the skills, the practice, the training for them to act smart, like wearing a helmet and putting on a seatbelt. That's the world we live in. And instead of being like, oh, we can protect them, actually giving them these kinds of skills is protecting them. And we have to view it that way.
I'm not going to shake your hands because I was told I shouldn't do it while I'm sick. Julia
That-
Kayam, Ed DeVoe, it's good to see you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.